All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Natasha Martin. I work for a company called Rose Tree Solutions. We don't actually have a home base. We're a fully remote company, so we've got people scattered throughout the U.S. So what is a solution architect? I always have a hard time explaining this to people. I'm like, I've got to figure out what my elevator pitch is for this. Also, I was an architect before I realized I was an architect. So I was actually out with my husband and some of his friends one night that worked in the IT space. And I was trying to explain what I did. And they're like, oh, well, you're an architect. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I didn't know there was a name for that, but that's good to know. So solution architect is an expert who designs or oversees and also sometimes executes the implementation of complex systems, making sure that they align with business needs, technical requirements, and the overall goals of the organization. So that sounds kind of very broad and not specific, so hopefully I can give some details into what exactly that means. So these are some of the industries that I've worked with. I've worked with over 20 national and international brands. Some of those are franchise models, some of those are just single brands. They typically, on average, have around 100 to 250 locations for each one of those brands. And we're dealing with large volumes of data. So anywhere from around 3 million customers per brand to over 80 million. So lots and lots of data. And so a workflow for a typical architect, I always say I am not a salesperson, but I can understand what these implementations look like. And so often we're supporting those pre-sales conversations when customers are trying to figure out what's the right technology to implement the solution that we're trying to solve for. And so I'll come in and be a technical expert in that aspect. They're also looking at what technologies do they want to use, what are the right, maybe sometimes they kind of have an idea of what they want to do, but they need a little bit of guidance. And so we can come in and say, well, here are our recommendations on, what you can do from a marketing automation perspective or a customer data perspective or kind of a process automation perspective normally to help their teams work more efficiently. Then we go into a discovery phase once we kick off with a client. So we're trying to understand what are the technologies. So we work with large brands. So we're trying to understand what are their, where are they storing their customer data? What are their point of sale systems that they're using? Do they have a mobile app? What are their websites built on? So all of those different things. We usually request what's called an enterprise architecture diagram to understand what those systems are. They don't always have one, so sometimes we have to do discovery and then create one for them. Then we go into a plan and architect phase where we understand where their current technologies are, where the technologies that we work with, which is Salesforce, fit into that picture, and then we design a solution, actually build out what's called a solution design document, and then we present that to the client. Then we go into the build phase, which is very iterative. We usually have demos with the client to make sure that we're all on the same page and that we're building out the right solution. Then we'll go into a test phase and then deploy and support. So very typical to kind of your development pipeline that you build out when you're working on projects. So what technologies do I work with? So like I said, primarily Salesforce. So Marketing Cloud is my area of expertise. Data Cloud is a new product with Salesforce and something I've been working with for the last couple years. And then Salesforce CRM is also, all of these things are connected, so we kind of work within all of these systems in some aspect. Lucidchart is something that we use a lot, and so we're always diagramming business processes and technology connections, and so we're in there pretty frequently building out things. This is an example of an entity relationship diagram or an ERD, so we work in the world of a lot of acronyms, and so learning what those things are. And so this just shows the relationships between different kinds of objects related to customer data. So you have like accounts, and then you have an individual that represents the individual customer and how that relates to an account. You've got other things like contact points, like what is their phone number, what is their email address, and they could have more than one, and so those things are stored in objects. And so that's what this kind of represents here. And then this is an example of a solution architecture diagram. So as we're looking at, Salesforce products that the customer has purchased and where does it fit into their technology stack, Are we using this for loyalty? Are we using it for marketing? Are we using it for sales? Often they're not going to have a Salesforce product for all of these solutions. And so their architecture diagram, is probably going to have something on the commerce side that maybe isn't Salesforce, or maybe, they're using something different for customer service. And so we tailor that to whatever that is. And so this is kind of a 1,000-foot view of what we're going to start building out to make sure that at a high level, we've got this correct before we actually start building out some of the other details. So other technologies that I work with, lots of different cloud technologies. I am not an expert in all of these, but we have to be kind of aware of these different things. So Snowflake is something that I've worked with a lot, AWS for data storage solutions, there's a lot of stuff here. I didn't have room to list it all. Also databases, I work with a lot of SQL and a lot of different types of SQL depending on the platform that I'm working in. And then from an integration and middleware perspective, we work with MuleSoft a lot, but there's other solutions that our clients have. Boomi and Workato is another example. And then languages, there are proprietary languages within the systems that I use. So Marketing Cloud has what they call server-side JavaScript and AmpScript that I work with. And then also HTML, CSS. We work with a lot of APIs and a lot of SQL, lots of SQL. Yeah.
So when you say you work with them, are you actually like coding in those languages, or just you're just aware and okay?
Yeah, actually coding in them. That's a good question though. All right, and so there's other concepts that we have to be aware of too. So has anybody here heard of data lakes and data warehouses? Okay, data warehouses has been around for quite a while. Data lakes is a little bit newer. So data lakes is a place that enterprise companies store more unstructured data. So it could be documents, it could be images, it could be videos, the things that you wouldn't normally think of as data that's stored in a table. Whereas data warehouses is more structured data. So you typically have databases and tables, and there's defined schemas and those sorts of things. So enterprise companies have a ton of data, and so they've got to have a place to kind of centralize that data. And these are usually the solutions for that. And a lot of times this is used for analytical purposes, but they'll also aggregate data here for other systems, which means they're combining all the data up into what are just the data points, like maybe 10 data points I need to know about a customer, and they'll aggregate that up and push that to other systems. And then these are some of the teams that we typically work with. So we're usually working with teams across an organization. So my background is marketing, so I'm usually always working with a marketing team, but we're very strongly connected with different IT teams throughout an organization, mobile app teams, website teams. We're also working with sales and customer service teams, big data teams, and also leadership. So we've got to get in front of leadership and show why we are bringing value to the organization and be able to do things like quarterly business reviews to make sure that, because these are not cheap contracts either, so it's very expensive to build out solutions like this. And so usually these things are surfaced to leadership and organizations to understand why are we spending this money and what value are we getting out of it. All right, and so I talked about we work with a lot of IT teams. So I don't actually build integrations, but I work very closely with teams that do build integrations. And so for example, Marketing Cloud on the Salesforce side, if a customer is purchasing something and you get your confirmation of your purchase, within milliseconds of actually making that transaction, I build out I define kind of the schema and the table for the data that is going to be passed in that template. And then I build out like the JSON payload for the IT teams and say, here is the API route that you're going to call. Here's how you're going to structure the data that you're calling. Here's what the authentication to that system looks like, and then hand that off to their team to actually build it. So we work with a mix of both REST and SOAP APIs, which REST is typically JSON based, but it can be other formats as well. SOAP is XML based. We also work with teams to understand what needs to be event-driven versus batch process. So if you're purchasing something and you need to have a response from that brand in real time, that's going to be an event-driven integration pattern, versus batch might be, you've got a nightly process that needs to run. I don't need this in real time, so we're going to run this in a batch process instead. We also talk about point-to-point versus hub and spoke from an architecture design perspective. So point-to-point is where you have one system directly connecting with another system. But when you come into an enterprise organization, those different products are being switched out all the time. And so if you have a customer flow where somebody is going onto a website and they're creating an account, and you need to make sure that they are created as a customer profile in another system, we usually talk about a hub and spoke model, which is you have a contact creation API that can sit between two systems regardless of what those systems are. And so that if one of those systems needs to be swapped out at some point, it's a lot easier to do so. It also gives you the ability to bring in other systems and connect to that kind of same process flow too. And then, of course, dependencies. I know you talked about dependencies a lot when you're talking about an entire enterprise and all of their platforms and all of their teams. That is fun, is trying to figure out all those dependencies. So we're working on a loyalty transformation with a client right now, and there are a lot of dependencies in play there, and also scalability. So when you're talking about that type of customer volume, you've got to be able to build out processes that are going to be able to handle that kind of traffic. And so this would be an example of kind of some of the things that we help their teams orchestrate. So, you know, customers can have different touch points for a brand's website and their mobile app, on site in a store. We need to make sure that if they are creating an account or signing up for something in some way, that they're ending up in the systems like a data warehouse and a CRM, which is a customer relationship management platform, or that if they're purchasing something, the inventory management system is getting the data that it needs to know that, you know, I've sold this product, so I've got one less available in inventory than I did before. And then from a CDP perspective, that stands for Customer Data Platform. That's where you bring all the data together, not necessarily in a data warehouse, but in a different system where you're trying to get a cohesive view of your customer. So what are all the touch points from mobile app to website to in-store? Have they, you know, logged a customer service complaint? Are there opportunities from an engagement perspective? What offers are they engaging with? So all of those things holistically, so you can figure out what are the opportunities to, you know, sell more to that client, to make that experience better for that client, those sorts of things. Mobile app engagement is another one. So I've worked with teams to figure out how do you drive engagement. So first drive downloads for an app, but also engagement. And so there are data points behind there related to the usage of an app on your phone. And so typically companies will see, you know, who out of their customers, who has downloaded the app, who has not. For those that have downloaded the app, what's the last time that they opened the app? So what was their last session date? A lot of times there's different features within the app that you can monitor on an event base, where if you interact with that event, it sends basically just a piece of data to the systems to say this person has interacted with that. If they haven't, then you can use that data to then push messaging to them that says, hey, have you noticed this feature in the app? Here's what it can do for you. And so you can start to drive more engagement and make sure that your app is going to stay installed on their device. And then marketing automation, which is my specialty, is you know, just how do we take these things and interact with the customer in, you know, a real-time fashion that's relevant to them. And so say, for example, they visit a website, they look at a product, they put it in their cart, but then they don't actually go through with the purchase. And so that triggers an entry event into their customer data platform that they can then act on and trigger a message for a customer that uses that event plus additional data related to whatever that abandoned item was, and send them an email that says, hey, don't forget about this thing that you looked at. You know, I think we've all received those. So that's just kind of behind the scenes how that happens. All right, and so I know they talked about this already, but I do want to just call out again the the Bison Bash. We've got that coming up. If you have not gotten your tickets, it's going to be a lot of fun. So we hope that you all will join us for that. And then let's connect. So I've got a couple links here, either to LinkedIn or to the Techlahoma Slack, and you can find me there as well. Thank you.